If you're ready to uncover one of the darkest true stories inside America's most dangerous jail, hit the like button, subscribe, and stay with me till the end, because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. The smell of sweat, rust, and something burning filled the air that night in Rikers Island. The walls were sweating too. It was as if the prison itself had caught a fever. Inside cell 38, Jerome Murdough lay on a thin mattress, his uniform sticking to his body. The thermometer on the wall had already broken hours ago. The air conditioner was dead, and the vent blew nothing but heat. Jerome tried to lift his head, but the air was thick, heavy like fire. His skin felt like it was melting. He pushed himself toward the steel toilet, hoping to splash water on his face, but even the water coming out of the tap was hot. He called out for help, his voice echoing through the cell block. No one answered. The officers were somewhere down the hall, sitting in the control room where the fan still worked. They didn't check the cells that night. They didn't want to. "It's too hot to make rounds," one of them muttered. So the night went on, the temperature climbing past 100 degrees. Jerome closed his eyes. He thought of the Marines, the years when he stood tall, wearing his uniform with pride. He wasn't always a prisoner. He once served his country. But life after war wasn't easy. The world outside didn't care much about veterans like him. When he came home, the noise in his head never stopped. He tried to sleep on park benches because it was quieter than the streets. That's where the cops found him one cold night, sleeping in a stairwell. They called it trespassing. And just like that, a man who once served America was locked away in one of its darkest places. Hours passed. The heat grew stronger. Inmates banged their cell doors, shouting for the guards. "Yo, it's too hot in here. Somebody's gonna die tonight." But their voices bounced off concrete and disappeared into the darkness. Inside cell 38, Jerome stopped moving. His skin had turned red and dry. The mattress beneath him was wet with sweat, and the air was boiling. The guards didn't notice until the next morning when the smell of burnt cloth drifted through the hall. When they opened his door, the officers froze. The cell was an oven. Jerome Murdough's body lay still, his face peaceful, as if he had drifted away in his sleep. The metal bed frame was too hot to touch. The temperature inside had gone beyond 100 degrees Fahrenheit. He had melted in the heat. The news broke days later: homeless Marine found dead in Rikers Island cell, heat blamed. People were shocked, angry, and heartbroken. But deep inside the prison walls, many knew this wasn't an accident. The air conditioner had been broken for weeks. Complaints were ignored. Maintenance never came. And someone, maybe several someones, had decided it wasn't worth fixing. So the question remained, did Jerome die because of the heat, or because nobody cared? Before his death, Jerome had written a note on a scrap of paper, one that was later found under his pillow. The handwriting was shaky, the ink half smudged from sweat. It read, "Tell my mom I'm fine. I just need some air." That note would become the key to uncovering everything that happened behind those prison walls, the lies, the cover-ups, and the truth about how a Marine was forgotten in the dark heart of Rikers Island. As the investigators arrived, flashlights swept across the cell, and one detective whispered, "This wasn't just heat. This was neglect." And somewhere in the control room, a young officer stared at the monitor, terrified. Because he knew exactly what had happened that night, and he knew who had ordered the cameras turned off. But he stayed quiet. For now. Rikers Island woke up to whispers. Inmates talked through the walls, their voices carrying down the long, echoing halls. Word spread fast, "Yo, that Marine in 3 South, he's gone." By breakfast time, everyone knew. But in the staff room, the guards said nothing. They drank their coffee, avoided eye contact, and turned the volume up on the radio. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak about it. Officer Daniels sat alone in the corner, his uniform still damp with sweat from the night before. He couldn't stop replaying the image of Jerome Murdough's cell, the stench, the heat, the silence. He had been the one sitting near the control room when Jerome called out. He heard it. Everyone did. But the sergeant had told them, "It's too hot to do rounds. Don't open any cells." Just write it out till morning. And that's exactly what they did. But now, Jerome was dead, and Daniels couldn't sleep. His conscience clawed at him, louder than any inmate shouting through steel bars. Across the city, in a small apartment in Queens, Jerome's mother, Mrs. Murdough, answered the phone. The voice on the other end was cold and quick, official words, no emotion. "Ma'am, your son Jerome Murdough was found deceased in his cell early this morning." She dropped the phone. Jerome had been arrested only a week ago for sleeping in a public housing stairwell. The police called it trespassing. The judge set bail at $2,500, an impossible amount for a homeless veteran who barely owned a pair of shoes. So he stayed locked up in Rikers, waiting for a date that would never come. Mrs. Murdough had tried to visit him 2 days earlier, but she was turned away. "Visiting hours are over," the officer said, without looking at her. Now, she would never see her son alive again. Inside Rikers, investigators began their work. The medical examiner took photos. The warden looked nervous. The press was already outside the gate. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, a secret began to break free. Rain tapped against the window of Rachel Stone's tiny Brooklyn apartment as she listened to the voice on the phone. Officer Daniels spoke in whispers, his tone trembling like a man walking through a minefield. "I shouldn't be calling you," he said. "If they find out, I'm finished." Rachel leaned forward, typing notes fast. "Tell me what really happened that night." There was silence. Then a sigh. "The AC unit in the mental health block was broken for weeks. We filed reports. Nobody came. The sergeant said the budget was tight. And the cameras near cell 38, they were switched off hours before Murdough died." Rachel froze. "Switched off? Why?" "That's what I'm trying to tell you. Someone didn't want that footage to exist." Daniels hung up before she could ask more. Rachel stared at her phone. The hum of the city outside felt distant now. She knew she was holding the first thread of something big, and pulling it might unravel the whole system. The next morning, she walked into the New York Tribune newsroom, clutching her notepad. Her editor, Marcus, looked up with his coffee half raised. "Don't tell me you've got another Rikers piece," he said. Rachel dropped the file on his desk. "This isn't another piece. This is the truth." Marcus flipped through the pages, reading her notes about the heat, the missing footage, and the ignored reports. "This is huge, Rachel. But we can't print it without proof." "Then I'll get proof," she said, already reaching for her coat. Back inside Rikers, Officer Daniels couldn't breathe easily anymore. Every hallway felt like it had eyes. The sergeant watched him too closely. His partner, Bell, avoided him completely. And every time Daniels passed the control room, he saw that red light, the same one that showed when the cameras were recording, still blinking off. That night, Daniels found himself alone in the records room. The hum of the old fluorescent lights echoed in the empty space. He used his ID card to access the report files. One folder caught his eye: maintenance requests, Block 3 South. He opened it. Dozens of printed complaints stared back at him. Air conditioning malfunction, June 14. Extreme heat in cell area, inmates complaining of sickness. Urgent, fans not working, risk of medical emergency. All of them were signed by staff. All of them were marked pending. Daniels felt his pulse quicken. He scanned the room, then pulled out his phone and began snapping pictures. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway. He froze. The light from a flashlight swept across the room. "Who's in here?" a voice barked. It was Sergeant Moore. Daniels ducked behind a shelf, holding his breath. The light passed just inches from his face. Moore stood in the doorway, his tone sharp. "Records room's closed. Whoever's in here better remember Rikers doesn't forgive snitches." Daniels stayed still until the footsteps faded. Then he slipped out through the side exit, his hands shaking. He knew now there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Rachel followed another lead, the maintenance contractor listed for Rikers Island. The company's office was small, tucked between a tire shop and a laundromat in Queens. She showed her press ID to the old man behind the counter. "I'm investigating the Rikers heat death," she said. The man frowned. "You're the third person to ask about that." "Third?" Rachel asked. "Who else came?" He hesitated. "Two guys. Didn't give names. Said they were from the Department of Corrections. They took copies of all our work orders. Everything related to Rikers." Rachel's heart dropped. Someone inside the system was cleaning up the evidence. When she returned home that night, an envelope was waiting under her door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single USB drive. Her hands trembled as she plugged it into her laptop. A video file appeared, CAM 38_07_12. She clicked play. The grainy footage showed cell 38, timestamped hours before Jerome Murdough died. He was alive, pacing, sweating, wiping his forehead. Then, the screen glitched, the image froze, and suddenly, the camera cut out. When it came back, the timestamp had jumped forward 7 hours. Jerome was motionless. Rachel stared in horror. Someone had deleted those missing hours and replaced them with silence. Then, another file popped up on the screen, a text document titled Internal Note, Do Not Release. It read: AC failure reported repeatedly. No action taken. Supervisor advised to maintain silence. Incident handled internally. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. She knew this was no accident. This was a cover-up. The next day, Officer Daniels got a message slipped into his locker. "Meet me by the East Lot tonight. Come alone." He almost ignored it, but something about the handwriting stopped him. It wasn't from a fellow officer. It was from someone on the inside, someone who knew more. That night, under a flickering streetlight near the prison lot, a woman appeared. She wore civilian clothes, her ID clipped to her belt. "You're Daniels?" she asked. He nodded cautiously. "Who are you?" "Dr. Patel. I worked in mental health. I was supposed to check on Murdough that night." "What happened?" "They told me not to go down there. Said it was under control. But I saw the logs, he called for help 7 times. And the system flagged his name as a high-risk patient." Daniels clenched his fists. "They killed him." "No," she whispered. "Neglect killed him. But the system buried him." She handed him a small folder. "Everything you need is in here, copies of his medical alerts, the complaints, and the heat warning emails. If you're serious about speaking up, take this to someone who will listen." Daniels took the folder, his throat dry. He didn't know it yet, but that decision, meeting her, taking those papers, would soon make him the most wanted man inside Rikers. Because someone else was watching from the shadows that night. And they saw everything. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button, because now, the truth about what really happened inside Rikers Island is about to explode. The folder Officer Daniels held that night felt heavier than anything he had ever carried, heavier than his badge, heavier than his guilt. Inside were copies of medical warnings, heat complaints, and one printed email that changed everything. It was dated 2 days before Jerome Murdough died. It read: "Urgent, temperature in 3 south exceeding safety limits. Inmate health at risk. Request immediate maintenance response." And at the bottom, a short reply from the sergeant. "Noted. Will address after weekend." Jerome died that weekend. Daniel sat in his small apartment, the only sound the hum of his ceiling fan. Every instinct told him to burn the folder, pretend it never existed. But then he remembered Jerome's cracked voice, calling for help through the metal door. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He took out his phone and texted Rachel Stone. "Meet me tomorrow. No phones. No recording. 10 p.m. Battery Park." The next evening, Rachel waited near the water. The city lights danced on the dark Hudson River, and the wind carried a faint smell of rain. When Daniels finally showed up, he looked exhausted, eyes red, hands trembling, uniform jacket zipped tight like he was hiding something underneath. "You brought it?" she asked. Daniels nodded and handed her the folder. "If you print this, they'll come after me." Rachel opened it, scanning the documents under a dim street lamp. Her eyes widened. This is proof. You've got maintenance logs, heat warnings, internal emails. This could shut Rikers down." Daniels shook his head. "No, it won't. They'll bury it. They always do." Before she could respond, a car door slammed nearby. Headlights flashed across the park. Daniels' body stiffened. "We're being watched," he whispered. Rachel turned, but the lights were already gone. Still, she could feel eyes on them. "Keep it," he said quickly. "If anything happens to me, make sure the world sees it." Then he walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Back inside Rikers, tension was spreading like wildfire. The warden had received word that someone was leaking information. Internal Affairs had launched a confidential probe. Officers were whispering, pointing fingers. Sergeant Moore, the man who had ordered the no rounds call the night Jerome died, called Daniels into his office. His smile was cold, sharp like a blade. "You've been asking too many questions, Daniels. You forget where your paycheck comes from?" Daniels stayed calm. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job," Moore said, stepping closer, "is to keep your mouth shut. You start thinking you're a hero, you'll end up like that Marine." Daniels felt his stomach twist. He didn't respond. He just left, his mind racing. Later that night, he found his locker broken open. The inside was empty. The folder was gone. Someone knew. Rachel's story hit the New York Tribune 2 days later. "Neglect behind bars, leaked files reveal Rikers cover-up in veteran's death." The city exploded. News anchors repeated Jerome Murdough's name like a prayer and a curse. The mayor's office promised a complete and transparent investigation. Protesters gathered again, louder this time, angrier. Rachel's phone rang nonstop, news stations, lawyers, activists. But one call made her blood run cold. "Miss Stone," the voice said, "this is Officer Bell. Daniel's partner. I think he's in trouble." Rachel's breath caught. "What happened?" "He didn't show up for roll call today. His phone's off. Nobody's seen him since last night." Her heart pounded. She knew what that meant. Somewhere deep in Rikers, in the old administrative wing that had been closed for years, Officer Daniels sat handcuffed to a chair. The room smelled of mildew and metal. A single bulb flickered overhead. Sergeant Moore stood in front of him, arms crossed. "You made a big mistake," Moore said. "You think the public cares about one dead inmate? About one guard with a guilty conscience? You think they'll remember your name?" Daniels stared at the floor. Moore leaned closer. "We've been cleaning up messes here long before you. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Daniels looked up slowly, his voice quiet but steady. "You can silence me. But the truth's already out." Moore smirked. "Maybe. But let's make sure you never get to tell the rest." He turned off the light. Outside, Rachel was driving fast across the bridge toward Rikers. Rain splashed across her windshield as her phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. She answered. "Rachel Stone?" "Yes, who is this?" A shaky voice replied, "This is Dr. Patel. They found out about the files. Daniels is in danger." "Where?" "Old administrative block. East Wing. They're moving him now." The call cut off. Rachel pressed harder on the gas. She didn't know how she was going to get inside, but one thing was clear, the story wasn't over yet. And inside that old building, as thunder rumbled across the island, Officer Daniels whispered one last prayer. For Jerome. For the truth. He didn't know it yet, but by sunrise, everything would change for Rikers, for Rachel, and for the city that had turned a blind eye too long. The storm over New York grew heavier that night. Lightning cut across the sky as Rachel parked her car on the narrow service road that led to Rikers Island. Rain slammed against the windshield, but she didn't care. She had one goal: find Officer Daniels before it was too late. She tucked her press badge into her coat and stepped out into the downpour. The night air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and salt from the nearby river. Ahead, the gray outline of Rikers rose like a fortress, its chain-link fences glistening under the storm. She clutched a small flashlight and the folder Daniels had given her. Inside those pages was proof, but without him, it would all be dismissed as unverified. Rachel knew the risks. She had no clearance to be there, and if the guards caught her, she'd be charged with trespassing. But something inside her pushed forward, the same instinct that had made her chase stories others were too afraid to tell. She made her way to a side gate, where the metal locks had rusted from years of neglect. Lightning flashed again, and for a brief moment, she saw someone waiting on the other side of the fence. It was Dr. Patel. Rachel rushed over. "How did you?" "No time," Patel interrupted. "Daniels is in the old block. They moved him after he tried to contact you again." "Contact me? When?" "This morning. He left a message on my office line. Said he had something even bigger, something about who signed the cover-up orders." Rachel's heart raced. "Then we need to get him out." Patel hesitated. "Once we step inside, there's no going back." Rachel met her eyes. "There's already no going back." Inside the East Administrative Block, the lights flickered weakly, most of the hallway dark except for the occasional spark from an exposed wire. Water dripped from the ceiling. The entire building had been closed years ago after a fire, or at least, that's what the official records said. But tonight, someone had turned the power back on. As Rachel and Patel moved down the hall, they passed empty offices filled with broken desks and stacks of yellowing papers. The walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti scrawled by forgotten inmates, "Nobody leaves. Silence is survival." They reached the basement door. Patel pulled out a small keycard and swiped it. The lock clicked open. Daniels sat inside, bruised, tired, but alive. His wrists were tied with zip cords. The second he saw Rachel, his eyes widened. "You shouldn't have come." Rachel knelt beside him, cutting the ties loose. "You risked everything for the truth. I'm not letting them erase you." Before they could move, heavy footsteps echoed above. Voices. Flashlights. "They know we're here," Daniels whispered. Patel grabbed Rachel's arm. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind this wall, it leads outside near the north lot." The three of them hurried through the narrow hallway as the shouts grew louder. The tunnel was damp and cramped, filled with old pipes and thick cobwebs. The only light came from Rachel's flickering flashlight. Halfway through, Daniels stopped. "Wait. I can't leave without the files." "What files?" Rachel asked. He pointed to a small metal cabinet hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. "They're all in there: disciplinary reports, deleted camera logs, internal orders. It's the entire paper trail." Rachel pulled it open. Inside were folders marked confidential, do not release. She stuffed as many as she could into her bag. Then they heard boots pounding on the concrete behind them. "Go!" Daniels yelled. They ran, slipping through the tunnel until they reached the iron grate at the end. Patel pushed it open, and cold air rushed in. They stumbled out into the rain, gasping. Sirens wailed in the distance, the alarm had been triggered. Rachel turned to Daniels. "Come with us." But he shook his head. "If I run, they'll say I'm guilty. Someone needs to face them from the inside. Daniels, they'll destroy you." He managed a weak smile. "They already did. Now it's my turn." He shoved the bag into Rachel's hands. "Tell them what really happened. Don't let my story die with his." Before she could stop him, he turned back toward the prison, vanishing into the darkness as the floodlights swept across the yard. Rachel and Patel ran toward the car, mud splashing beneath their feet. Behind them, the sound of shouting grew louder. Rachel didn't look back not once until she reached the bridge. Then, in the rearview mirror, she saw it, flames rising from the East Administrative Wing. Patel gasped. "Oh my God, they're burning it." Rachel gripped the steering wheel. "They're destroying the evidence." But she still had what mattered: the files, the photos, the proof. By dawn, the city was buzzing with the news. Fire at Rikers Island, investigation underway. Officials claimed it was an electrical fault. But Rachel knew better. She sat in her car outside the Tribune office, watching the rain wash over the windshield. She opened her laptop and began typing her next story. They tried to silence a Marine. They tried to silence the man who told his story. But the truth still breathes, and now, the world will finally hear it. As she typed, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. "Rachel Stone?" "Yes, who's this?" A man's voice, low, quiet. "I saw what you published. You don't know me, but I worked in records. You missed one thing." "What thing?" The man who ordered the cameras off wasn't a sergeant. It was someone higher. Someone outside Rikers. "Who?" she whispered. There was a pause. Then, the deputy commissioner. The line went dead. Rachel froze. The corruption went deeper than she ever imagined. And now, she knew this wasn't just about Jerome Murdough. This was about an entire system built to protect itself, no matter who burned inside. The day after Jerome Murdough's death, the air around Rikers Island felt heavier than usual. The guards avoided eye contact. Inmates whispered behind steel bars, their voices echoing through the concrete halls. No one said his name out loud, but everyone knew what had happened. A man had cooked alive in his cell, and no one stopped it. Outside the prison walls, the city of New York began to stir. The headlines were brutal: Marine dies in overheated Rikers cell. But even with the shock, most people just shook their heads and scrolled past. For many, it was just another sad story in a city full of them. But for a few journalists, activists, and veterans, it was a call for justice. Detective Harris couldn't get Jerome's file out of his mind. He had seen death in all forms: shootings, stabbings, overdoses, but something about this felt wrong. The coroner's report mentioned that the temperature in Jerome's cell had risen above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The air vents were broken, the window sealed, and the guards hadn't checked his cell for over 4 hours. 4 hours. In a place where inmates could die for less, that was an eternity. Harris visited Rikers in person, walking through the same corridor Jerome had been dragged down weeks before. The smell of bleach and sweat clung to the air. Every sound: a door slam, a key turn, a guard's footsteps, echoed like thunder in his ears. He met with one of the inmates who'd known Jerome, a quiet man named Tito. Tito was sitting in the yard, eyes low, voice calm. "Jerome was a good dude," Tito said. "Didn't bother nobody. Just wanted to serve his time and go home. He used to talk about his mom, how he was gonna see her again." Harris nodded. "What happened that night?" Tito's eyes hardened. "The heat was crazy. We were all sweating through our sheets. Some of us banged on the doors, yelling for the COs to check the cells. They ignored us. Jerome kept asking for help, said he couldn't breathe. Next thing we knew, it was quiet. Too quiet." Harris's jaw clenched. The cameras on that block had been malfunctioning that night. The guards on duty claimed they were doing rounds. Yet the logs showed gaps, big ones. Back at his office, Harris sat staring at Jerome's photo: the Marine uniform, the calm eyes, the quiet pride. He felt a mix of anger and sadness. "You survived war," he whispered. "But you couldn't survive Rikers." The case started drawing attention. News stations replayed Jerome's story. Protesters gathered outside the Department of Correction, holding signs that read "Justice for Jerome" and "Rikers is a tomb." Politicians promised reform. The warden issued a statement expressing deep regret. But inside the prison, nothing changed. The same broken fans kept turning, the same guards walked the halls, and the same inmates prayed not to be forgotten. Weeks later, Harris got a sealed envelope in his mailbox. No return address. Inside were copies of internal emails from Rikers management, proof that the air conditioning system in Jerome's unit had been reported broken a week before his death. They knew. They all knew. He turned the papers over in his hands, heart pounding. The truth wasn't just negligence. It was cover-up. Someone had signed off the repairs but never made them. Someone had buried the work order. Harris called a reporter he trusted. "I have something you need to see," he said. Days later, the story broke again, this time with evidence. The public exploded with outrage. Neglect, inhumane, corruption, the words filled the airwaves. The Department of Correction promised another investigation. But Harris knew how these stories ended. A few suspensions, a press conference, and then silence. He visited Jerome's mother one last time. She sat on her porch, holding a framed photo of her son. Her eyes were tired but full of quiet strength. "Will they ever pay for what they did?" she asked. Harris hesitated. "Maybe not all of them. But people are watching now. People know his name." She nodded slowly. "He always wanted to be remembered for doing something good. Maybe this is it." As Harris left, he looked back once more at the small house, the flag by the window, the flowers by the steps. Jerome Murdough's story had started in the heat of war, and ended in the heat of a prison cell. But in death, he had become more than an inmate number. He had become a symbol of how the system fails the forgotten, and how one man's silence can expose a nation's truth. The city lights flickered in the distance as Harris drove away. Somewhere beyond the bridges, Rikers Island sat under the same cold sky, its walls hiding countless more stories. But tonight, one man's voice, the voice of a forgotten Marine, refused to stay buried. If this story moved you, if you believe no one deserves to be forgotten, then hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more real-life crime stories that reveal the truth behind the walls most people never see. Because sometimes, justice starts with awareness, and your voice might be the one that finally makes a difference. This was The Marine Who Melted Inside Rikers. Stay alert. Stay aware. And I'll see you in the next story.